Long after St. Patrick had come and gone, Northern Ireland became the site for one of the longest and ugliest conflicts in modern history. At the forefront of this conflict were two communities, one Catholic and one Protestant. Their politics were different, their neighborhoods were segregated, and their coexistence was under constant threat. In this episode of Catholic Focus, we'll look at the relationship between Catholics and Protestants in the Northern Ireland conflict. We'll also look at how a once violent nation became a model for peace and reconciliation. The partition of Ireland into two separate states created new tensions in the north. Catholics were treated as second-class citizens. They had no power, few civil rights, and even fewer jobs. The opposing political ideologies and inequalities between Catholics and Protestants led to a bitter conflict that would last over 30 years. This conflict is often referred to as the Troubles.
John McGarry is a professor of political science at Queen's University. He is the author of several books on the conflict and peace process.
What the British government did in 1921 was they partitioned Ireland. And then the question became, well, what part of Ireland, how much of Ireland should stay part of the United Kingdom? And their choices had to be made. The two main choices, I think, were including the 6 counties that are currently in Northern Ireland, or including another 3 counties. The decision was made by the British government and by Protestants in Northern Ireland to keep 6, because within those 6 counties, Protestants had a strong majority of about 65%. So they knew their majority would not be threatened. Northern Ireland was governed by a regional government in Belfast, which was exclusively Protestant. Even though the population of Northern Ireland is 40% Catholic, now about 45% Catholic, and that government used its power to discriminate against Catholics in jobs, in public housing, and various other ways, starting from the school system.
Sandra and Ben lived through the Troubles, both growing up in strict Protestant and Catholic households.
When I went to school, there was a couple of school buses did that run, and I mostly liked the Protestants all got on one school bus and the Catholics got on the other school bus. So we didn't even have that opportunity, like outside of school, to mix even on the school bus.
There would have been a difference in the way we were taught history in school, in that as a Catholic we were taught a lot of Irish history, and it was certainly slanted from a very Irish angle and perhaps slightly anti-English, anti-British, anti-unionist. We wouldn't have known that at the time. That's what you're taught as a child, that's what you believe.
It's really just an excuse for tribal warfare at that level, as I see it, right?
On the Protestant side, of course, in their schools, they would not play Gaelic football or hurling, and they would play rugby and cricket. So different schools, different histories, different sports. And of course, the two communities lived in different neighbourhoods that were sometimes up against each other. So it wasn't that they lived, all the Protestants lived in one part of Northern Ireland and the Catholics lived in another part. They were right cheek and jowl.
Retrospectively, when I look back, it was very unusual. I mean, when I grew up, it really was probably the height of the Troubles, as they were called. There was a lot of danger. It was a very fearful society. Although I think by the 1980s, people had grown accustomed to it. So it seemed very normal to have soldiers walking past you in the street. It seemed very normal to have armed policemen walking past you in the street.
You do grow up with a very narrow-minded view of life, like this is the only way, right? Which obviously it's not. The unfortunate things about Northern Ireland is that religion and politics are all mixed together.
Because they lived in different residential neighbourhoods, they would go to different workplaces. The shipyards in Belfast, for example, a big employer was almost exclusively Protestant. If you came from a Catholic ghetto, you might not meet a Protestant until or unless you went to university.
Mark McGowan is the principal of St. Michael's College at the University of Toronto. He offers his insight into how the modern Troubles broke out.
Catholics have almost no social upward mobility within their occupations. The one thing that they have in the 1960s, though, is access to education, and good education. And there's an interesting coming together of elements here, an interesting synergy, because you also have now worldwide tremors. You have the student protest movements in Europe, in Paris, and other major European centers. You have the civil rights movement in the United States. You have the 60s sort of exploding. Those civil rights that are to be accorded to blacks in the United States, well, shouldn't Catholics be accorded those in Northern Ireland?
The conflict began with Catholics protesting for civil rights. Paramilitary groups got involved and things quickly got worse.
On the Catholic side, hardline Irish nationalists who call themselves Republicans because they support the 32-county United Irish Republic. These were people who, during the conflict, supported the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, as it's called. And they were responsible for, I think, most of the killing. 3,500 people were killed during the conflict between 1969 and 1998. Almost all Catholics are nationalists, but many Catholics didn't support this campaign of violence at all. On the other side were Protestants. Protestants are sometimes called unionists because they support the union between Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom, and they're very strongly opposed to any idea of reunifying Northern Ireland with the Irish Republic. Unionists had their moderate elements too, who were very much against violence, just like on the Catholic side, but they also had this extreme element, and they tend to be called loyalists. Now, these people would kill Catholics. Many of them are innocent Catholics. These loyalist organizations could simply drive into a Catholic area and know with a reasonable degree of certainty that anyone marching down the street or walking down the street was a Catholic, and therefore they could be killed.
The lessons that my parents would have taught us all would have been, if you had seen a parked car on a street, particularly outside a police station, you move away from it very quickly. If you're walking down the street and a car slows down behind you, that you have to move away quickly in case someone's trying to attack you. If there's ever a bomb scare, you move away very quickly. You don't wait around to see what's happening. Our chapel was blown up. Whenever I was a small child, there was a bomb planted outside the chapel. It was only that the timing on the device was such that it should have gone off when we were all leaving, but the priest had suddenly realised that he'd forgot to announce an additional message and kept everyone back by 5 minutes, and therefore, apart from one person, no one was even injured.
These loyalists killed Catholics, and the Republicans killed Protestants, but Republicans also killed and deliberately targeted members of the security forces, and this is the third group. And the security forces, in turn, could be made up of at least two different components, one of which was the police, which was called the Royal Ulster Constabulary, or RUC. Now, the RUC was a locally recruited police service, and then there was the British Army. The British Army were there from 1969, and the British Army had as many as 20,000 troops in Northern Ireland. It's a very small area. So they had far more troops in Northern Ireland than they had in Iraq. Canada's got 2,000 troops in Afghanistan. The British Army had 20,000 troops in Northern Ireland, which is a place the size of Algonquin Park. So if Canadians think about that, they'll have some idea of the magnitude of the British Army's involvement. British soldiers who were initially brought into Northern Ireland because they were considered to be a more impartial agency compared to the Northern Ireland Protestant police force. They were brought in to some extent to protect Catholics in the late 1960s. The IRA were able to say that the enemy is back again. These are the British imperialists. These people are unacceptable, and like a guerrilla movement, they launched attacks on the British Army. The British Army reacted with a heavy hand, and then the IRA said, "We told you so." And the rest is history.
Coming from this culture of violence, what do Ben and Sandra think of life in Canada compared to Northern Ireland?
The difference coming from Northern Ireland to Toronto, it's amazing. The difference is so vast. I mean, the religion here is your own personal belief. If you so wish, you can go to church, you can believe in whatever you want to believe in, you can worship in whatever you want to worship in, but no one tries to influence your opinions. You don't try to influence other people's opinions.
I chose Canada because it's known to be tolerant. Toronto especially is multicultural, like all the religions are accepted. I found out after I came here that back in the day, maybe 100, 200 years ago, Toronto was not so tolerant and actually it had its own issues.
The dividing issues between Irish Catholics and Protestants were hardly exclusive to the Troubles. Similar acts of sectarian violence among Irish immigrants also took place in Canada.
Any immigrant group, whether they be Irish or non-Irish, will bring as much of the old country with them as they possibly can to provide those links and those chains with the homeland. So it's not surprising that the Irish brought, substantial baggage with them, and they tend to also become pronounced over specific issues. So, for example, Irish Catholic and Irish Protestant communities could live in peace with one another, virtually integrated with one another in small-town Ontario, in larger cities, in the Ottawa Valley, but it would take an issue like, for example, separate Catholic schools that might ignite some passions between them.
Why is Canada different? Why did Catholics and Protestants move past things from the homeland and learn to coexist together?
I don't think there's anything distinctive about what has happened in Canada, but certainly, the Irish found themselves when they came here, even in the 19th century, to be one of many groups. Irish Protestants had to share the terrain with Scots, with the English, with the Welsh, with Germans, and with Americans who had come from a variety of backgrounds as well. Irish Catholics had to share their church where they found themselves actually a minority. So on both sides you have a mosaic in which the Irish have to sort of navigate as just one other group. It's not just us and them, it's us among all of the thems.
So how did Northern Ireland become the peaceful place it is today? It's thanks to a document known as the Good Friday Agreement.
So what the Good Friday Agreement did in 1998 was it addressed two dimensions. The Good Friday Agreement addressed the first dimension by making sure that the government of Northern Ireland, instead of being made up just of Protestants, would be made up of both communities. This was called power sharing. So instead of the government being simply comprised of a party representing a majority of the population, all the major parties in Northern Ireland, whether they're Catholic or Protestant, are represented in government. And of course Catholics now have a role in government, and they have a stake in government, and government cannot discriminate against them the way it did in the past. The second dimension, the fact that Northern Irish Catholics wanted to have links with the Irish Republic, that was also dealt with in the Good Friday Agreement too, because the Good Friday Agreement not only set up a government in Northern Ireland, a regional government in Northern Ireland, but it required that that government join with the government of the Irish Republic in a common body called the North-South Ministerial Council. What it means is the two governments must cooperate with each other over common matters. In addition, the British government said that at any point, if a majority of people in Northern Ireland want to join the Irish Republic, they can, right? In a referendum, they can vote to join the Irish Republic. So what the British government was saying to the IRA is that Northern Ireland is not, we are not holding on to Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom only for so long as a majority of its people want. And as soon as a majority change their mind, we will let it go. It would be like the Canadian government saying to Quebec, as soon as you want to go, that's fine, anytime you want, a majority there wants. And that sort of took the rug out from underneath the IRA's campaign of violence. What was there for the IRA to fight over? And these were the two dimensions. There was a third dimension which was important and it's controversial. Of course, there were large numbers of prisoners in jail in Northern Ireland, paramilitary prisoners, some of them convicted of quite horrific crimes. The question arose, well, if we want peace, we're going to have to do something with these prisoners. These paramilitary organizations to which these prisoners are attached, they're never going to put down their weapons while their comrades are in jail serving life sentences. So what do we do? And some people, of course, said, well, why we can't let these people out? They're guilty of egregious crimes. But other, I think, actually saner heads prevailed. And they said, look, if we want to put this violence behind us, we are going to have to release those prisoners. They were released on condition that if they reoffended, they would be put in jail not just for the new crime, but for the balance of the sentence which they would have served, you understand? And then what that did was it made these prisoners, it gave them a vested interest in maintaining peace, because they knew if things broke down again, that they would be back in jail. These prisoners have since become pillars of peace in Northern Ireland, paradoxically.
When you do cross the border now, the only profound difference initially that you come across is that Northern Ireland uses the pound and miles per hour when you're driving, as opposed to the euro, and kilometers per hour. It's a very different atmosphere than what it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
Belfast has changed dramatically since the peace process. Suddenly I realised that you could go out and have fun, and there was lots of entertainment in Belfast city centre, which never existed before. Prior to that, everyone stayed in their own neighbourhoods. No one ventured into the city centre. It was just far too dangerous. As time goes on, and as we're further and further away from essentially the troubles, the conventional troubles, I hope that things change to such an extent that people don't want to go back to the way it was before.
Peace gardens have been created around the world to pray for peace in Northern Ireland. The Irish Peace Garden at Martyrs Shrine is one of these projects.
This garden is a place of reflection and prayer in a peaceful setting. That maybe is no accident, as over the last 10 years we have prayed for peace around the world and in our homeland. As of those who have attended the pilgrimage over the past 10 years, our prayers, we hope, have helped to bring peace to Ireland. We continue those prayers for a lasting peace with justice, and to those people who still hold fear and anger in their hearts, we ask them to please be a part of the peace process.
Another special Irish Peace Garden is across the ocean, back in Northern Ireland. This is the St. Patrick's Centre. It provides education programs for children and young adults from many different cultural and religious backgrounds. Through the life of St. Patrick, young people learn many invaluable lessons about peace and reconciliation.
Northern Ireland has been seen as a very successful peace process, and it's been marketed around the world as a template for other similarly divided societies. I have to emphasize that no two places are identical, but I think there are certain principles which we can take from the Northern Ireland experience, positive principles. One of them is that even conflicts which seem very intractable, very difficult to resolve, can be resolved if you get the right kind of settlement, which each of the sides can respect and which accommodates each of the sides. So no matter how bleak things look in places like the Middle East, for example, it's not impossible to resolve conflicts. The second principle, I think, is that if you're living in a divided society, you can not have that society governed by one community. The government needs to involve all of the communities. That's the second principle. The third principle is that sometimes you have to negotiate with hard men. Sometimes you have to negotiate with gunmen. People will have to negotiate in the Middle East with Hamas, and people may have to negotiate with the Taliban in Afghanistan. We shouldn't think of these organizations as necessarily monolithic organizations which are all of the members are committed to violence for the sake of violence. They're in fact very diverse organizations, and some of the members are looking for a way out of violence if they can get the right kind of settlement. So we can talk to these organizations, and we can talk to the more moderate elements of them, and we can bring them behind the peace settlement. So that's a very important lesson I think Northern Ireland has for places like Israel, Palestine, and Afghanistan.
In more recent years, international communities followed closely events in Northern Ireland, which have led to the signing of the Good Friday Agreement and the devolution of powers to the Northern Ireland Assembly. Your Majesty's government and the Government of Ireland, together with the political, religious and civil leaders of Northern Ireland, have helped give birth to a peaceful resolution of the conflicts there. I encourage everyone involved to continue to walk courageously together on the path marked out for them towards a just and lasting peace.
The peace process in Northern Ireland is an inspiration to societies where ethnic and religious conflicts still persist. It demonstrates how a nation can put behind its violent past and choose to negotiate rather than continue to fight. Of course, there's still work to be done, but the majority of the people want and promote peace among the 6 counties. The lesson learned is that political identity and religious identity should never be considered to be the same. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Catholic Focus and that you come away with a better understanding of the Northern Ireland conflict. If you'd like to order a copy of this program, write to us, focus@saltandlighttv.org. For Catholic Focus, I'm Alessia Domanico. Until next time.